In the last screencast, I talked about the different plans and the different compromises that were agreed upon at the Constitutional Convention. Now let's compare how the Articles of Confederation, or the AOC, compared to the Constitution. Okay, earlier we had talked about the Articles of Confederation's weaknesses, that it gave the states too much power, that there was no power for the federal government to be able to collect taxes, that they were asking states for money. There was no regulation of trade by a federal entity, so there was no monitoring of trade activities. There was no president to enforce laws, and all of these weaknesses, nothing could be changed, nothing could be done without all 13 of the states agreeing. So let's look at exactly how the Constitution provided a solution for those issues. So we went from a confederation, state power, to a federal government where there was a national power. So this is like going from your parents being gone for the weekend and your siblings and you are doing what you want, but you're not taking care of each other, to your parents come back, they're the federal government, and somebody is now in charge and taking care of business. No power to tax. Congress can lay taxes or levy taxes. No regulation of trade. Congress will be able to regulate commerce between states and between the United States and foreign countries. You have a commander-in-chief. You have a head diplomat. You have a head of state that is going to be able to enforce law. And not every state had to agree. In order to change the Constitution, all you need is a supermajority. Didn't mean for that to happen. We're just going to call it a super M. Alright, so a supermajority. You need 2/3 to propose an amendment, and you need 3/4 to ratify it. And this was a good beginning. But there was a need to compromise between the states for the purpose of getting this ratified, this document ratified. Okay. Well, if the document is so awesome, why would anyone not like it? Why would you not like the Constitution? First of all, go over the definition of ratification. Ratification just means approving or accepting this document as law, as the foundation of our government. The people who didn't like our Constitution were anti-federalist. So just remember that. By anti, meaning they didn't like federal, right there, they didn't like the federal government. These were your people that were also known as states' writers. Like, they believed that the states should have more rights. The leaders of the anti-federal movement were like your Patrick Henrys, even Thomas Jefferson, people who believed, and you would find them mostly in the southern states, but people who believed that this country would be better served by states. States are the entities or the governments that are closest to the people. Richmond is closer to us than Washington, D.C., or at that time than Philadelphia. So our government here in Virginia would be able to serve us better than the national government because they knew more about us. They also believed, the anti-federalists, their argument, so besides the fact that they believed that states are closest to the people and they could better serve the people, they believed that the Constitution didn't do enough to secure the powers of the states or individuals. They feared that a strong national government would come into power and they would strip the states and the people of their rights. They believed that the president was too much like a king, and having one executive would lead to an issue of corruption. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And they also wanted a Bill of Rights. They believed that if we had a Bill of Rights added to the Constitution, we could protect the people and the states from any abusive government or any encroachment of government power. Then you had your Federalists. These were your people who were pro-federal government, pro-constitution. These are your nationalists. The leaders in this movement are definitely Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton. Now, I call them the leaders because they were the writers of the Federalist Papers, which was a series of persuasive essays meant to convince states to ratify the Constitution. By the way, it took 9 of the 13 states to ratify the Constitution. So these Federalist Papers circulated in the states that were on the fence about whether or not they were going to approve the Constitution. Their pro-Constitution arguments are as follows. They believe you didn't need a Bill of Rights because each state constitution had their own. They believe the Constitution had enough provisions to keep the national government from becoming too strong with checks and balances and separation of powers. And they also argued in the Federalist Papers, particularly Federalist Papers 16 and 17, which you'll look at, they argued that the national government was not interested in controlling such affairs or issues like healthcare, agriculture, education. So the federal government by nature wouldn't want to take away powers from the states because the federal government needed the states in order to do the work that the federal government wasn't interested in. Boy, times have changed since then, because now the federal government controls a lot of those issues, obviously healthcare, agriculture, roads, and education, but back then that was the Federalist arguments, that the federal government didn't want to control those things. What we end up with is a Madisonian model, because eventually the Constitution gets ratified. So when we're looking at our government, the structure of our government, we call it a Madisonian model because really it was based off of James Madison. He is the father of the Constitution. He took notes during the entire convention. He was the author of the Virginia Plan, and we do use a lot of the Virginia Plan in the Constitution. And he really was the one who tried to mitigate or calm the fears of the anti-federalists when it came to this idea of factions. Now remember, factions are those groups of people who organize to push their self-interest in government. Factions are considered bad because if this majority of unorganized, uneducated, landless class of people were to take over and control government decision-making, they could pose a threat to the wealthy class or the minority. And this threat would cause instability in government. So again, factions are the majority of organized, yet uneducated, landless class, okay, and they worried that that would pose a threat to the stability of government. Now, I want you to think, what is the source of a faction? You have to be able to organize people, you have to be able to petition your government, and you have to have free speech. So, you cannot take away the source of factions in government. Because if you take away the people's ability to petition, assemble, and have freedom of speech, you're undermining liberty. You can't undermine liberty. So instead of trying to take away what causes factions, which is liberty, you have to create a government that protects against the effects of factions. So Madison warned that this Constitution is going to be a solid Constitution to check tyranny of the majority and tyranny of the minority. This Constitution was going to prevent a group of people like, say, PETA, from rising up the ranks of government and passing laws that would require all of America to be vegetarians. PETA has the right to exist, they have the right to assemble, they have the right to speech, but in our constitutional government, there's no way PETA is going to gain enough control to take over our government to amend our Constitution to make us all vegetarians. And let me tell you why. Madison said that would never happen. We have 3 branches. Each one of those branches have a very specific power. They're not going to easily give up that power. We have checks and balances. We give power to the president, we give power to Congress, we give power to the judicial branch, but we also give the other branches the ability to check the other branch's power. So we give the president the power to be commander-in-chief. Now we give the president the power to be commander-in-chief, but who declares war? Congress. We give the president the power to negotiate treaties. But who gets to decide whether those treaties become law? The Senate. We give Congress the power to write laws. But who has to pass those laws? The president. And while the president is doing his thing in enforcing laws, and while the Congress is doing their thing in writing laws, the judicial branch gets to decide what is constitutional or not. So, going back to the PETA example, if PETA were to write a law in Congress making us all vegetarians, unless the president is also a PETA fan, which is probably unlikely, he will veto that bill. And if he is a PETA plan, or a PETA supporter, sorry, somebody's going to sue over the constitutionality of that law, and the judicial branch will probably say, that's unconstitutional. You're infringing upon our rights. So Madison said this is really the best situation. We also further protect against factions by having a federal system. So we allow power to be shared between national and state levels of government. A faction may take over a state government, but the likelihood that it will take over enough state governments to change the Constitution is highly unlikely. We also have an electoral college. This protects the government from the will of the majority because the president would be chosen by electors instead of directly by the people. So if the people pick somebody completely stupid to be the president, like Miley Cyrus, the Electoral College could go through and say, well, they did vote for a woman, so we're probably going to go ahead and choose Hillary Clinton instead. I know, that's a stretch, but whatever. You get the point. The Electoral College is there as a buffer between the mob and tyranny of the mob and the uneducated people. One last thing I wanted to go over and I missed. The real reason why the Federalists were able to be successful in the ratification of the Constitution is because we finally gave in and added a Bill of Rights. And after the Federalists were willing to add a Bill of Rights, the anti-Federalist arguments were kind of put to rest, because that was what they were really waiting for. Okay. Study. Thank you. Bye.